Check your nickels before you spend them. The 1960, 1964, and 1977 Jefferson nickels could be worth far more than just 5 cents. Rare mint errors, full steps, and high-grade coins from these years have sold for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Grab your change and look closely. You might already have a valuable Jefferson nickel hiding in plain sight. The 1960 Jefferson nickel, a small 5-cent coin that most people would never give a second thought, hides a fascinating chapter in American numismatic history. It's one of those coins that quietly tells a story of precision, change, and unexpected mistakes at the U.S. Mint. Most 1960 nickels were ordinary. Millions of them were struck and spent in grocery stores, gas stations, and diners across the country. But a small number of them were struck with errors so unique that they turned this simple 5-cent piece into a collectible treasure worth thousands of dollars. To understand why the 1960 Jefferson nickel error is so captivating, we first need to go back to its roots. The Jefferson nickel design was introduced in 1938, replacing the long-running Buffalo nickel. Sculptor Felix Schlag created the iconic portrait of Thomas Jefferson for the obverse, a design that would remain virtually unchanged for decades. On the front, Jefferson's profile faces left, with the words, "In God We Trust" and "Liberty" along the edges, and the year of minting beside his collar. The reverse showcases his famous home, Monticello, with the inscriptions E Pluribus Unum, Monticello, 5 cents, and United States of America. By 1960, the United States Mint was operating at full speed. The nation was growing rapidly, and coins were in high demand. The Denver Mint and the Philadelphia Mint were the two main facilities producing nickels that year, and over 250 million Jefferson nickels were struck in total. Yet, despite this massive production, a few errors slipped through the cracks. Tiny mistakes that would later make these coins famous among collectors. One of the most intriguing 1960 nickel varieties is the 1960 D over D, D over D, repunched mint mark error. Back then, mint marks were hand-punched into the dies used to strike coins. If the engraver accidentally punched the D mint mark slightly off-center and then tried to correct it, the result was a doubled or overlapping letter. On these coins, you can see a faint second D underneath or beside the first, making it appear as though there's a shadowed outline. This D/D error is one of the most collectible varieties from the early 1960s. Even though it's small and often requires magnification to spot, it's a clear sign of old-fashioned minting craftsmanship and imperfection. Depending on the strength and visibility of the overpunch, a 1960 D/D nickel can be worth anywhere from $50 to several $100s. In pristine, uncirculated condition, some examples have sold for over $1,000 at auction, proving that even a small doubling mark can have a huge impact on value. But the 1960 Jefferson nickel wasn't just known for mint mark varieties. This year also saw a range of striking errors that turned ordinary nickels into highly valuable collectibles. One common but fascinating type is the off-center strike. When a blank planchet, the metal disc used to make coins, isn't properly aligned within the striking press, part of the design is struck off the edge, leaving a blank crescent on one side. A 1960 nickel that's off-center by 10% to 20% might sell for $40 to $100, but if it's 40% or more off-center and still shows a full date and mint mark, it could easily fetch $200 or more. Dramatic off-center strikes are highly prized for their visual appeal. Another notable error is the broad strike error, which occurs when the collar that normally keeps the metal in shape during striking fails to engage properly. This causes the nickel to expand outward, appearing slightly larger and flatter than usual. A 1960 Jefferson nickel with this kind of broad strike can be worth $75 to $250 depending on condition and the degree of expansion. Then there are clipped planchet errors, where a piece of the blank is accidentally cut off before the coin is struck. These coins have a distinctive curved or straight bite missing from the edge. The size and shape of the clip can dramatically affect value. Small clips might bring $25 to $75, but larger, more pronounced clips with clean, smooth edges and visible dates can command $200 or more. Collectors also prize double die errors, where the die used to strike the coin receives two slightly misaligned impressions during preparation. The doubling can often be seen on the lettering, numbers, or even Jefferson's eye and hairline. On a 1960 nickel, doubling on Liberty, "In God We Trust," or the date can significantly increase its desirability. A minor double die might be worth $50 to $100, but strong examples in mint state can sell for $500 or more. One of the more subtle but fascinating types of errors from 1960 nickels involves die cracks and die cuts. As coin dies wear down from striking thousands of coins, tiny cracks can form, transferring as raised lines or blobs on the coins themselves. In some cases, a portion of the die breaks off entirely, leaving a blank raised area known as a cud. These die cracks and cuds give each coin a distinct appearance, almost like a fingerprint of the minting process. Depending on the size and location of the die break, values can range from $25 for small cracks to over $200 for large, dramatic cuds. There are also lamination errors caused by impurities or weak metal bonding in the nickel's planchet. This can result in parts of the surface flaking, peeling, or bubbling. These imperfections make for fascinating texture patterns that are completely unique from coin to coin. A lamination error 1960 nickel could bring $40 to $150 or more, depending on its severity. And, of course, there are the wrong planchet strikes, among the rarest and most thrilling finds in coin collecting. Occasionally, a planchet meant for a different denomination, like a penny or dime, slips into the press meant for nickels. When that happens, the design is struck on a blank of the wrong metal and size. A 1960 Jefferson nickel struck on a cent planchet would appear slightly smaller, thinner, and reddish in color due to the copper composition. These mistakes are extraordinarily rare, often worth thousands of dollars. One example of a 1960 nickel struck on a penny planchet sold at auction for more than $4,000 for coin collectors. What makes the 1960 Jefferson nickel particularly interesting is that it sits at a transition point in U.S. mint history. This was a time when technology was advancing, but much of the die preparation and striking process still relied on human precision. Every repunched mint mark, misaligned die, and misfed blank planchet tells a story of the minting floor, of workers moving quickly to keep up with demand and machines operating at the limits of mid-century technology. The best part of the story is that many of these valuable errors are still out there. Because 1960 nickels circulated widely for decades, some of these mistakes could still be sitting unnoticed in pocket change, old jars, or forgotten rolls of coins. That's the magic of coin collecting, the possibility that a simple nickel could turn out to be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars if you were lucky enough to find a 1960 Jefferson nickel error in top condition, authenticated and graded by a professional service like PCGS or NGC. You might be looking at a value ranging from several hundred to well over $1,000. In rare cases, exceptional examples of the 1960 D/D repunched mint mark or dramatic off-center strikes in mint state have sold for close to $2,500 or more. Collectors love these coins not just for their value but for what they represent, a perfect mix of history, artistry, and accident. Each error coin is a frozen moment of imperfection in an otherwise perfectly regulated system. And in a way, that's what gives it its soul. The 1960 Jefferson nickel reminds us that even the smallest slip at the mint can produce something extraordinary. While most of these coins have long disappeared into the flow of commerce, the few that carry these rare flaws have been preserved as artifacts of American craftsmanship. They are reminders that even a humble 5-cent coin can carry a story worth far more than its face value. So next time you see a Jefferson nickel from 1960, don't overlook it. Hold it up to the light. Look for the mint mark, the edges, the surface. Maybe there's a faint doubling, a repunched D, or a missing piece that sets it apart. That little detail could mean your coin isn't just worth 5 cents, but a rare and valuable discovery that collectors dream of finding. Because in the world of coins, it's not always perfection that defines value. Sometimes it's the beautiful, accidental imperfection that makes history shine brightest. The year was 1964. America was in the midst of transformation. The final echoes of the Kennedy era lingered. The space race was heating up, and the nation's sense of progress was stronger than ever. But deep within the halls of the U.S. Mint, another story was quietly unfolding. A story that had nothing to do with politics or rockets, but with a simple, everyday coin, a 5-cent piece. The Jefferson Nickel. To most people, the 1964 Jefferson Nickel was just spare change, something you toss into a soda machine or use to buy a cup of coffee. But to coin collectors, the 1964 nickel holds an extraordinary legacy. It was the last year that saw the minting of the nickel in such staggering numbers, Over 2.8 billion coins were produced between the Philadelphia and Denver mints. It was also the final year that the mint date appeared for a while, since from 1965 to 1967, the U.S. Mint temporarily suspended mint marks to discourage coin hoarding. But amid those billions of coins, a handful were born different. Small errors, unnoticed by the mint workers at the time, slipped through production and made their way into circulation. Those little imperfections turned these ordinary nickels into valuable treasures, the kind of coins that collectors would later hunt for decades. Some of these rare 1964 Jefferson Nickel error coins have sold for thousands, and in certain cases even over $20,000 at auction. To understand why these coins are so special, we have to look at the man they honor, Thomas Jefferson. His profile has been on the 5-cent coin since 1938, a lasting tribute to one of America's founding fathers, the author of the Declaration of Independence and the third President of the United States. On the reverse side stands Monticello, Jefferson's Virginia home, with its elegant domed structure, symbolizing intellect, innovation, and American ideals. By 1964, this design had already become a national icon, familiar to everyone, yet full of subtle details that could easily reveal a minting mistake. The U.S. Mint that year was under intense pressure. The coin shortage of the early 1960s had reached critical levels, forcing the mint to produce more nickels than ever before. With such massive production numbers, it's no surprise that some errors slipped through the cracks. Every die strike, every metal blank, every machine alignment had to work perfectly in sync. But when something went even slightly wrong, it left behind an error that made history. One of the most famous and valuable types of 1964 Jefferson Nickel errors is the double die error. This happens when the coin's die, the tool that stamps the design, is misaligned during its preparation, causing the image or text to be impressed twice. On some 1964 nickels, you can see doubling in the inscriptions, "In God We Trust, Liberty," or the date itself. Others show faint but visible doubling on the reverse, especially around the words "E pluribus unum" or Monticello. These are not minor printing smudges. They're true minting errors, each one unique, each one worth potentially hundreds or even thousands of dollars depending on its clarity and condition. Another fascinating and highly sought-after error is the off-center strike. Imagine looking at your nickel and realizing that Jefferson's head is not centered, but pushed to one side, with a blank crescent on the opposite edge. The more off-center the strike, the more valuable the coin becomes, especially if the date remains visible. A 1964 nickel struck 50% off-center with a clear date can sell for $1,000 or more, while extreme examples, beautifully preserved, can reach well over $3,000 at auction. Collectors also treasure the broad strike errors, coins that were struck without the restraining collar that shapes the rim. Without that collar, the metal expands outward during the strike, creating a coin that looks stretched, wider, and thinner than normal. A well-preserved 1964 Jefferson Nickel broad strike can easily bring in $300 to $800, and pristine mint state examples even more. And then there's one of the most dramatic errors ever discovered on this coin, the wrong planchet error. Every denomination of coin is made using planchets, or blanks, that have specific sizes, weights, and metal compositions. But sometimes, due to a mix-up in the minting process, a coin gets struck on the wrong planchet entirely. A few 1964 Jefferson Nickels have been found struck on dime planchets, giving them a lighter color and smaller diameter. Others were mistakenly struck on copper cent planchets, making them appear reddish instead of the usual nickel-silver tone. These coins are so rare that collectors pay incredible premiums for them. A genuine 1964 Jefferson Nickel struck on a copper penny planchet once sold for more than $20,000 at a specialized auction. A remarkable price for a coin that started as a minting accident. Even smaller mistakes can make a big difference. Some 1964 nickels show die cracks, raised lines or blobs of extra metal caused by a fractured die. Others feature die clashes, where the obverse and reverse dies struck each other without a planchet between them, leaving ghostly outlines of Monticello's dome on Jefferson's cheek or traces of his profile behind the building. These kinds of visual oddities excite collectors because each one tells a story of imperfection and mystery. Depending on how visible or dramatic the error is, values can range from $50 to over $500. There are also struck-through errors, where grease, cloth, or even tiny pieces of metal debris got stuck on the die during the strike. When this happens, parts of the design appear faded or missing. For example, Jefferson's eye or the steps of Monticello may appear weak, distorted, or completely gone. Each struck-through coin is one of a kind, with some fetching between $100 and $600 depending on how distinct the missing features are. And then there's a unique twist in the 1964 nickel story, the so-called 1964 SMS coins. SMS stands for Special Mint Set, and though officially, no proof or special mint sets were issued in 1964, a few mysteriously high-quality coins surfaced decades later, believed to have been experimental strikes. These coins feature sharper details, satin-like surfaces, and strong, squared rims. Because of their mysterious origin, collectors prize them immensely. A 1964 SMS Jefferson nickel in pristine condition has sold for over $10,000, and when combined with a rare error, it could be worth even more. What makes these error coins so fascinating isn't just their rarity. It's how they embody human imperfection. Every error coin represents a fleeting moment in time when the machines, the mint workers, and the materials didn't align perfectly. And yet, instead of being destroyed, that moment was frozen forever in metal. Collectors often describe the hunt for a 1964 error nickel as thrilling and addictive. Many begin by searching rolls of nickels from banks, scanning each one for oddities. They look at Jefferson's eyes under magnifying lenses, inspect the steps of Monticello for doubling, and compare rims and edges to find signs of off-center strikes. It's a blend of patience, curiosity, and hope. The hope that one day, a rare treasure might appear from a pile of common change. Auction stories from around the country continue to keep the excitement alive. A collector in California once discovered a 1964 D nickel with a strong double die reverse. He had bought it in a coin roll for just 5 cents. When he had it authenticated and graded, it later sold for $16,000 at auction. Another coin, a 1964 nickel struck on a copper planchet, was found by a hobbyist who almost didn't notice its unusual color. That coin brought in more than $18,000. And yet another, with a perfect off-center strike showing a full date, sold for $2 for 100. Every one of these stories reminds us that sometimes treasures hide in plain sight. The 1964 nickel is one of the most heavily produced coins in U.S. history. Yet a tiny handful stand apart, transformed from ordinary change into pieces of numismatic history. Today, collectors still keep their eyes peeled for 1964 nickel errors. With billions minted, many remain undiscovered, tucked away in jars, drawers, or boxes of old coins. You might have one right now without even knowing it. A quick look with a magnifying glass could reveal a doubled inscription, a faint die crack, or a slightly shifted rim. The kind of tiny flaw that could turn your nickel into a coin worth hundreds, or even thousands. It's hard to imagine that a small 5-cent piece could be worth over $20,000. But that's the magic of minting errors. They remind us that perfection isn't always what creates value. Sometimes, it's the mistakes that make things truly special. In 1977, the United States was changing in more ways than one. The nation was celebrating its post-bicentennial pride. Disco ruled the dance floors, and the hum of progress filled every corner of American life. Yet, amid that wave of innovation and movement, an unexpected story was quietly unfolding. Not in Washington or Hollywood, but deep inside the U.S. Mint, where machines clanked and hissed, creating millions of everyday coins. Among those coins was one that would later become the center of fascination, value, and mystery, the 1977 Jefferson Nickel. To most people, a nickel was just a small coin, 5 cents, a piece of change you might drop into a vending machine or a parking meter without a second thought. But to numismatists and treasure hunters, the 1977 Jefferson Nickel became something extraordinary. Within that year's minting, something went wrong, and those minting mistakes, those so-called errors, turned a few simple coins into pieces worth thousands of dollars. Let's step back for a moment to appreciate what this coin represents. The Jefferson Nickel has been in circulation since 1938, featuring the noble profile of Thomas Jefferson, America's third president, on the obverse side, and his stately home, Monticello, on the reverse. Designed by Felix Schlag, this classic coin has stood the test of time. But by 1977, the design was showing signs of age, small details had softened over the years, and the mint was under pressure to keep production efficient as technology advanced. The U.S. Mint struck millions upon millions of nickels that year, 585 million from Philadelphia, 297 million from Denver, and around 32 million proof coins from San Francisco. That's nearly 1 billion nickels in a single year. And when you're producing that many coins, even the slightest mistake in the minting process can create something rare, something valuable. That's where the story of the 1977 Jefferson Nickel error coins begins. During production, countless coins passed through the massive presses at incredible speeds. Blanks were fed into dies that struck them with Jefferson's portrait on one side and Monticello on the other. But in rare cases, things didn't go quite as planned. Sometimes, a blank was misaligned. Sometimes the dies weren't properly set. And sometimes a completely different metal planchet found its way into the mix. Each of these errors created unique, one-of-a-kind variations, the kind of mistakes collectors dream about finding. One of the most coveted 1977 Jefferson Nickel errors is the double die error. This happens when the die used to strike the coin is impressed twice, slightly off from its first alignment. When the die is used to mint coins, this misalignment shows up as a subtle doubling in the design. On some 1977 nickels, you can see doubling in the inscriptions, "In God We Trust," or "Liberty," or even in Jefferson's eye and lips. These doubled features give the coin a ghostly look and a hefty price tag. Depending on the strength and visibility of the doubling, collectors have paid anywhere from a few hundred to several $1,000s. A pristine, sharply doubled 1977 nickel has even fetched over $4,000 at auction. Then there's the off-center strike error, one of the most visually striking mistakes you can find. This happens when the coin blank is not perfectly centered between the dies during striking, causing Jefferson's portrait or the Monticello building to appear shifted toward one edge. The more off-center the strike, the rarer and more valuable the coin becomes, especially if the full date remains visible. A 1977 nickel with a 40% off-center strike sold for over $1,500, while an extreme off-center example with full details brought in more than $3,000 at a specialized coin auction. Another fascinating error from this year is the broad strike error. When a coin is struck without the restraining collar that keeps it within its correct shape, the pressure of the strike causes it to spread outwards, creating a slightly wider, flatter coin. It's a subtle but visually distinct mistake that makes the coin appear stretched or flattened around the edges. A 1977 nickel with a clean, uncut broad strike in mint state condition can easily sell for $400 to $900 depending on its eye appeal. But the rarest and most thrilling of all 1977 Jefferson Nickel errors might be the wrong planchet strike. Every denomination of U.S. coin has its own specific size, thickness, and metal composition. A Jefferson nickel is supposed to be struck on a copper-nickel planchet weighing 5 grams. But occasionally, a planchet from another denomination like a cent, dime, or even a foreign coin finds its way into the press. When this happens, the result is a completely mismatched coin. For example, a few 1977 nickels have been discovered struck on copper cent planchets. These coins have a reddish hue instead of the typical silvery color and weigh less than usual. They're immediately recognizable and extremely valuable. One such coin sold for more than $15,000 because of its unique copper appearance and near-perfect condition. Another 1977 nickel struck on a dime planchet, smaller and thinner than normal, sold for over $9,000. Then there are the die cracks and die clashes, two types of errors that can make a coin look like a piece of abstract art. Die cracks occur when the die used to strike the coin develops fractures from overuse. Those cracks leave raised lines or blobs of metal across Jefferson's face or Monticello's dome. Die clashes happen when the dies strike each other without a blank between them, leaving mirrored impressions of the opposite design. Imagine seeing faint traces of Monticello across Jefferson's cheek, eerie, mysterious, and beautiful. Depending on how strong or dramatic these features appear, die crack or clash errors can bring in $100 to $800. Collectors also hunt for struck-through errors, which occur when grease, debris, or fabric gets trapped between the die and the planchet. The object leaves behind a blank or flattened area where part of the design is missing. A 1977 nickel with Jefferson's eye or Monticello's steps partially faded due to a struck-through error might look odd at first, but it's a one-of-a-kind piece that can sell for $200 to $1,000 depending on its condition. But perhaps one of the most fascinating mysteries of the 1977 nickel lies not just in its errors, but in its timing. By the late 1970s, the mint was modernizing its processes, experimenting with new materials and die polishing techniques. Because of this, some 1977 nickels show unusually strong details or satin-like finishes, features that weren't officially documented but are now recognized as transitional minting characteristics. These subtle differences make certain coins stand out to seasoned collectors who know what to look for. And every so often, a story emerges that captures the imagination of collectors everywhere. Like the man from Pennsylvania who found a strange-looking nickel while sorting through an old jar of change his grandfather left behind. It was a 1977 Jefferson nickel, but it was copper-colored, lighter than it should have been. After getting it authenticated, he discovered it had been struck on a penny planchet, one of the rarest types of mint errors. That simple 5-cent coin ended up selling at auction for over $20,000, changing his view of spare change forever. Or the young collector in Oregon who noticed something off about the rim of his nickel. It turned out to be a broadstrike error, a clean, flawless one, and after grading, it fetched over $1,200. These stories aren't fairy tales. They're real examples of everyday people discovering small pieces of history worth more than they ever imagined. The 1977 Jefferson nickel errors continue to captivate the coin community because they remind us of something profound. Value often hides in plain sight. Millions of these coins are still out there, sitting in piggy banks, jars, and drawers, unnoticed for decades. Yet, among them could be one with a slight doubling on the date, a crack running through Monticello, or Jefferson's face shifted off-center. A tiny mistake that turns an ordinary coin into something extraordinary. Collectors know that finding one of these gems takes patience, a sharp eye, and a little luck. Many spend hours searching through rolls of nickels, examining each one under magnification, hoping to catch the glint of something unusual. It's part detective work, part art, and part treasure hunt. The thrill comes from the possibility that your next coin might just be the one, the error coin worth thousands at auction. And that's what keeps the 1977 Jefferson nickel alive in the hearts of collectors. More than just a 5-cent coin, it's a symbol of imperfection's beauty. Proof that even in a world built for precision, mistakes can create something timeless. Whether it's a dramatic off-center strike, a subtle double die, or the rare copper planchet error, each coin tells its own story. A story of how a small flaw became a piece of history.